Hello and welcome to the channel where I explore concepts of creativity and the arts, along with some basic psychology and mental health and wellness ideas and how they connect to each other. Today I'm getting into the rather trendy concept of critical thinking and trying to answer the question, what do you mean by critical thinking? Because it's kind of a big idea with a lot of debate as to what it means, and we can get really in-depth and scholarly with it, but I wanted something very simple. So I'm going to give you my really easy to understand definition of critical thinking. I'm also going to be looking at critical thinking versus creative thinking and how those two are different. And finally breaking down the top critical thinking skills, because that is also something there's some debate on, but it seems like there are at least 6 that are pretty widely agreed upon, so we're going to look at those as well. This was supposed to include some ideas for how to develop your critical thinking skills and examples of how it's applied in daily life, but the video ran super long. So there is or soon will be a part 2 to this, so you can keep an eye out for that if you're interested. But otherwise, stick around. We're going to get into it. So first off, in trying to understand what critical thinking is, again, you can find really long, in-depth definitions, and they will disagree slightly. Very simply put, so I looked up the definition of critical. So to be critical is to evaluate the merits and faults of something. That, if you want to get down to the bare bones, that's really what critical thinking is. It's doing that in your thoughts. So when you're presented with a situation, instead of taking it for granted, you evaluate the merits and faults of whatever is presented to you. That's literally it. And then again, if you want to get into psych, you can break down all of the different processes involved in being able to do this. What are all of the different skills? And how do we really understand it on a deep level, which is great and something totally worth doing. I will try and link an article to that for anyone who wants to dig deep into it, but I wanted to get something simple out there. So any time in your life that you are evaluating the merits and faults of something, trying to decide whether or not it's true, whether or not it's worthwhile for yourself in your life, you're doing some critical thinking. And this is different than creative thinking. Haha, something else I love that I have a video on here. Creative thinking is where you are coming up with new ideas. That's the whole idea, is you're trying to connect new concepts and ideas in a way that hasn't happened before. Critical thinking is more about when you're given a situation, how do you analyze it? What do you do with all of the ideas and material that's already presented to you? So of course, what you want, if you're going to be really intelligent and active problem solving in your life, is to use both. We want to be able to think critically and creatively. They team up really well. But critical thinking is very helpful in problem solving. Huge. Decision making. Anytime you make a decision actively and you don't just passively accept what someone else is presenting to you, you are thinking critically. Understanding connections. Anytime you're presented information and you think, oh, I bet this relates to this, I bet those are connected somehow, you are doing some critical thinking. And it helps in choosing the best option. It helps in a whole lot of things, but these are sort of the basics, right? Anytime we're making a decision, choosing what's best, evaluating the information given to us, we're doing some critical thinking. So within this sort of broad, simple concept, there are a lot of different critical thinking skills. And it's another thing people don't quite agree on, but there seem to be a pretty common 6. If nothing else, there are at least these 6 that are widely agreed upon to be skills of critical thinking. The first one is identification. So anytime you're presented with a situation, you actually ask questions about it. So you say, what is happening here? Who is involved? What actions are they taking? Why are they taking these actions? And what is the probable outcome? You can see that there is a wide range, and I think this is part of why there's so much different information to be found. You could dig deep into any element of these critical thinking skills and feel really overwhelmed and there's a ton of work to do there. Similarly, in our lives, we can do either a very small, simple amount of critical thinking, or we can get deeper with it. So if you're going to practice identification in terms of critical thinking, you can either very simply say, oh, what's happening? Oh, this is happening. I think the situation is pretty much at face value. Or you can say, no, let's really think about what's happening here. Who are all the players involved? What do they all want, right? You can make it like a chess game, and now you're doing some deep critical thinking. So the first one is identification. The second one is research. Once again, something most of us do very simply. Google. Anytime you have a question or you're not sure if something's true, you can Google it. But if you want to do it well, you're going to read some decent articles, you're going to check your facts, you're going to check your sources, and that's where we get the reputation for critical thinking being like very intellectual and heavy. It can be, and if you're curious about something and you have strong feelings about it, do the research, dig into it. If it's like an opinion you hold really strongly, make sure you're right. Do some critical thinking, like do some homework on it. So the second one is research. The third one, so necessary and so difficult to do, is to identify bias. And that means your own and other people's. So we do this all the time. I think everyone's really familiar with the concept of bias in politics. Maybe a friend of ours will talk about a politician and we're like, well, yes, but you've been biased towards that party forever. So I don't really believe any of the facts you're giving me because I know how you lean. It's harder to do that for ourselves and say, I probably believe this because I have a tendency towards that. But sometimes we can. It's actually not impossible. It's not at all impossible. We just need to be a little bit introspective and try to be aware of our own tendencies and thoughts. Then the fourth one is determining relevance. So you've been asking questions, right? Gathering information, trying to figure out what is the situation, what's happening here. Then you have to decide what's actually relevant, especially if you're trying to maybe solve a problem. Let's say you work in human resources and someone brings you a situation they're having with a coworker and it's your job to investigate and figure out what's true. You may interview a whole bunch of employees, get their stories, but then at some point you have to decide which ones are actually relevant to the situation. You can't follow every breadcrumb and every bit of information you can possibly get a hold of because you will be overwhelmed and you won't actually get anything done. So you have to be able to decide what's relevant. Then the next one is we need to be able to make inferences. So making an educated guess. And you might not always be right. That's what makes it an inference. This is something we see constantly anytime someone is doing a science project or like really trying to make a new discovery. They're like, I am pretty sure, I am fairly certain that these two things are connected in such a way that if we add in this element, this is what will happen. And they are often wrong, but being able to make an inference is a really important part of critical thinking and coming up with great solutions. So you have to have the ability to get really good information, evaluate it as best you can, and then make a little jump. And if you can't make that jump, you won't really be doing the problem solving. So you have to be able to make an inference. And then I thought this was interesting. The sixth one that seems fairly common is simply to stay curious, which strikes me more as a mindset than like a particular skill. But curiosity is kind of a skill, and it's the ability to stay interested in things, to like keep looking and keep learning. And it's critical actually because it's what keeps us from being totally passive. So let's say you have a friend who loves history. They tell you a ton of facts about World War II. You don't love history. You have like no interest in it. You're not going to fact check them. You're hardly going to remember what they told you because you are not interested. You're not curious. Potentially this friend who loves history could be a great resource. You could learn a ton from them. You could take it off on your own and like go down these rabbit holes and become like highly educated and do a whole bunch of critical thinking about what happened in this historical period and how does it relate to today and how has that impacted the way you personally think, because how has it shaped society? Like, you know, you can go deep down these rabbit holes or not, or you could just stop there and say, cool that you read that, dude. And I don't even mean to say it's necessarily a bad thing. We all have so many hours in the day and so many things to think about, but curiosity is an important element of critical thinking, because without it, we wouldn't do any of the rest. So you can find a few more. Those are the 6 predominant basic ones from what I've found. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this helpful. Again, there's a part 2 in the works that will dig a little deeper into how to actually develop your critical thinking skills, giving examples and my own personal favorite strategy, the exercise I like to do in my own kind of snobby artist life that's really fun. Keep an eye out for that. Go ahead and subscribe if you haven't, and I will see you next time.